Tales from the Manor. For condensed and reimagined tales of horror, suspense, sci-fi, and a dabble of fantasy. From the horror shelf, I bring you The Black-Eyed Children. It started on a rainy November evening. Jim Reynolds was driving home from his late shift at the diner. The rhythmic sound of his windshield wipers, the only thing breaking the silence. The roads were slick, reflecting the dim glow of the occasional street lamp, and he had to keep his eyes peeled for deer that might dart into his path. The last thing he needed was another repair bill. As he rounded a bend near the edge of town, his headlights illuminated two figures standing by the roadside. Jim squinted. At first he thought they were kids, no older than 10 or 12, soaked to the bone in the downpour. One of them raised a hand, signaling for him to stop. Against his better judgment, Jim slowed to a crawl and rolled down the passenger window just enough to hear over the rain. And with a closer view, they did appear to be about 8 and 12 years old. "You kids all right?" he called out, leaning slightly toward the opening. The taller of the two stepped closer, her face pale and framed by wet, stringy hair. "Can you help us?" she asked. Her voice was flat, emotionless. Jim felt an uneasy twist in his gut. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, his voice tinged with suspicion. "It's late and there ain't no houses nearby." The girl tilted her head, and for the first time Jim noticed something was off. Her skin was unnaturally smooth, almost plastic-like under the dim light of his car. Then she stepped even closer, and he saw her eyes. Black, completely black. No whites, no irises, just endless, inky voids. Jim's heart leapt into his throat, and he instinctively recoiled. The second figure, a smaller boy, moved to stand beside her. He, too, had those eyes, cold, empty, and unnatural. "Please, mister," the girl said. "We need a ride." Jim's first instinct was to slam on the gas and get out of there, but something about the kids held him in place. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Where are you trying to go?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The boy's lips twitched into a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just let us in," he said. "We won't hurt you." The words sent a shiver down Jim's spine. He didn't like how the boy had phrased it. "We won't hurt you." It sounded less like a reassurance and more like a veiled threat. "I don't think I can do that," Jim replied, his voice firm despite the fear tightening his chest. The girl's expression didn't change, but she took another step closer to the car. Her hands, pale and wrinkled from the rain, rested on the edge of the window. "Let us in," she repeated, her voice more insistent this time. "We can't come in unless you invite us." Jim's pulse pounded in his ears. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, but he was frozen, caught in the oppressive weight of their gaze. The air in the car felt thick, suffocating, as if the very presence of these children was bending reality around them. "No," he said finally, forcing the word out. He rolled up the window and stomped on the gas. His tires screeched as he sped away, his eyes flicking nervously to the rearview mirror. The two figures stood motionless in the rain, their black eyes fixed on him until they disappeared into the darkness. Jim didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the windows made his heart race. He double-checked the locks on his doors and windows, drew the curtains, and sat in his recliner with a baseball bat across his lap. But the unease didn't fade. Around 3 a.m., just as he began to doze off, a loud knock jolted him awake. It came from the front door. 3 sharp, deliberate raps. Jim's blood ran cold. He crept toward the door, bat in hand, and peered through the peephole. The girl and boy were standing on his porch, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of his porch light. They weren't wet anymore, and their clothes appeared pristine, as if the rain from earlier had never touched them. They stared directly at the peephole, as if they could see him. "Let us in," the girl said, her voice muffled by the door. "We just want to come inside." Jim stepped back, his heart hammering in his chest. He didn't respond. The knocking came again, louder this time, more insistent. "We know you're in there," the boy said. "Let us in." Jim's grip tightened on the bat. "Go away!" he shouted, his voice cracking with fear. The knocking stopped. Silence fell over the house, but it was the kind of silence that felt alive, pressing in from all sides. Jim stayed where he was, his eyes fixed on the door, until the first rays of sunlight began to creep through the edges of the curtains. When he finally worked up the courage to open the door, the porch was empty. No footprints, no sign of anyone having been there, but he knew what he'd seen, and he knew they would be back. Over the following weeks, Jim's story made its way around town. At first, people laughed it off, chalking it up to exhaustion or an overactive imagination. But then the stories started piling up. A young couple driving home from a late-night movie claimed 2 children had appeared out of nowhere on a desolate stretch of road, waving for help. When the couple slowed down, they were overcome with an overwhelming sense of dread and drove away. Another man reported seeing 2 kids standing in the parking lot of a gas station at midnight, their eyes black as coal, staring at him until he drove off. People began locking their doors earlier, avoiding quiet streets at night. Whispers of the black-eyed children spread like wildfire, each account spookier than the last. One incident involved a young woman named Sarah, who was staying late at the local library to finish a term paper. It was nearing midnight when she noticed 2 children standing just outside the glass doors of the entrance. They looked out of place, wearing outdated clothing, and were completely still. At first she assumed they were lost and went to the door to ask if they needed help. But as she approached, a chill ran down her spine. Their faces were too pale, and when they turned toward her, she saw their eyes, bottomless pits of black. The boy stepped forward and knocked gently on the glass. "Let us in," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Sarah stumbled back, her heart pounding, and quickly locked the doors. When she looked again, they were gone, as if they had vanished into thin air. Security footage later showed no one at the entrance. Another account came from a gas station attendant named Mark, who worked the graveyard shift. Around 3 a.m. the station was empty, the highway outside silent. He was restocking the shelves when the door chime rang. Looking up, he saw 2 kids standing near the entrance, both dripping wet as though they had been caught in a storm. Except there hadn't been any rain that night. Mark greeted them, but they didn't respond. Instead, they moved in unison toward the counter. "Can you call our parents?" the girl asked, her voice unsettlingly flat. It wasn't until they stepped fully into the fluorescent light that Mark noticed their eyes. His breath hitched, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over him. He stammered out an excuse and ducked into the back room. When he returned minutes later, the store was empty. Reviewing the security footage, Mark saw the doors open and close, but no one had entered or left. What did they want? Why did they appear? No one had answers, but one thing was clear. The children were relentless. One night, Jim was awoken by a familiar sound, 3 sharp knocks on his door. He'd been expecting them. He sat up in bed, his pulse steady now, as though he'd resigned himself to whatever was coming. Slowly, he made his way to the front door and looked through the peephole. The children stood there, just as they had before, but this time there were more of them. 4, 6, a dozen. They crowded his porch, their black eyes glinting in the moonlight. The girl from before stepped forward and placed her hand on the door. "Let us in, Jim," she said, her voice soft but commanding. It's time. Jim's hand trembled as he reached for the lock. He didn't know why. Perhaps it was the weight of their gaze or the strange pull of their voices. He turned the bolt and opened the door. The last thing he saw was their eyes, endless pools of darkness that seemed to consume the very light around them. And then silence. Jim Reynolds was never seen again. There have been dozens of reports from all over the world, people encountering black-eyed children, always late at night, always wanting to be let in, some believing that they only offer something sinister in return. The true nature of the black-eyed children remains a mystery, but one thing is for sure: every so often, on rainy nights near the edges of small towns, drivers report seeing two pale figures, standing by the roadside, waving for help.